you look at like the pyramids in Central America or the Great Pyramids in Cairo, in Egypt, Machu Picchu, also the landscape here around Glastonbury, all these structures are very, very precisely aligned with celestial constellations. If you look at Stonehenge, for example, is very much aligned with the rising or the setting sun at the solstices. So there is a strong awareness and connection to the consciousness of our life on planet Earth being strongly and deeply connected to what is happening in the cosmos. I started to understand the oneness beyond time and space through the energy lines of the geography of the planet and how information is stored within the geography of the planet, like our personal history, collective human history, ancestral history, vast ancient planetary history. Everything is stored as information, as vibration within the geography and geology of the planet. Spirituality was very much upward directed, like into transcendence, liberating yourself from physical into like the transcendence, liberating yourself from Maya. In the wisdom of like the indigenous cultures, it's in the other direction. There, the wisdom resides in the connection with the earth, in the connection with the wind, the water, the fire, the earth, the elements, in the connection with nature. But Sikhi is exactly the bridge between both of those for me, which is that transcendental experience of the divine, but living it here and now, embodied as humans on planet Earth in relationship with all of humanity and with all of the ecosystems and all of existence on planet Earth. As time passed, there were different fractions of like the Druids that became Christians that then turned into like different maybe Masonic lodges. Now what you would call secret societies control more or less undercover and under the current of what is running the planet right now. Their most sacred place of worship was where Wall Street was built. There is some intentional influence on controlling like the earth energies through the wisdom of the connection of the energy of the earth through the Masonic lodges, one could say, and that maybe ties back to what happened in Punjab, was where there was Masonic influence. Is a high intelligence, high awareness on how certain small fragments of the scriptures in Sikhi were changed, certain small parts were taken out, so Sikhi was disempowered. I was using mantras in Sanskrit. The direction was upwards, very transcendental, and starting to utter Gurmukhi, I really felt it helps and supports me to be here, to be in my body. There's no pathway out. It really brings me here into the now moment. If you look at Gurmukhi, it is related to Sanskrit, but it is very much related to the runes as well, which is the ancient script of like the Nordic lands of Scandinavia, probably also here on the British Isle. It holds something, what I would call is something very elemental. It feels more ancient and more embodied to me. It is not like Sanskrit, for example, is very like, feels like it's out there, floating, and Gurmukhi is like here and now. And I feel what the Gurus have transcribed with Gurmukhi is a fully identified and fully transcribed light language. Each consonant, each vowel, each syllable that gets created is not only something to be understood with our mind, but it is something that activates an energy circuit within our physical and more subtle embodiment. It's a phenomenal treasure that has been passed on to us.
Hello everybody and welcome back to Illuminating Dialogues number 39, where I'm really grateful to sit down and talk to Shamir Singh today on the podcast. How are you and where are you coming from in the world?
Blessings, Jhoty. It's an honor to have this conversation with you. Lovely to be connected with you and lovely to share with all of the listeners. Thank you for being here. I am right now in Butley, which is a small village just outside of Glastonbury. And most people know Glastonbury, I think, from the Glastonbury Festival. But beyond the festival, Glastonbury itself holds a lot of magic, is also known as the ancient Isle of Avalon. Many people come here on pilgrimage from all over the world. A lot of people know this place as the heart chakra of the planet. Yeah, so it's been a place of pilgrimage for thousands and thousands of years. And somehow, yeah, with my life's history, life brought me to this place, and I feel very grateful and blessed to be here right now and share this conversation with you.
Awesome. I'm so excited to have this conversation and dialogue. I've been delving into ancient Britain, understanding, trying to understand before actually colonization of Britain. Also connect to my own Sikh ancestry, um, and understand more. And as I'm sure if people have been watching the previous videos with episode 31 with Dr. Kamarup Singh and so on, we're slowly unfolding experiences. So I'm very grateful for you to come and share. And we had a brief discussion at the start of this year, and just a lot of insights already through that one conversation. So I'm really excited to dive into Glastonbury, the myths of Avalon, what it meant for the ancient Britain people, perhaps the intelligence of these people as well, your journey, um, perhaps the chalices, um, Gurmukhi script and Devanagari, and also about the Freemasons. Because you're in England, I'm in Scotland, there's also some history and also how this relates to Sikhi as well. So a lot to cover. We'll see how it goes. For those of you who are not familiar with Shamir Singh, Shamir Singh focuses on grid activations and is helping people reach deeper into their spirit through connecting actually to the ancient energies here in UK and has travelled around the world, and also helps connect us to our ancient ancestry and the Hung wisdom as well. So I'm really grateful again to sit here. So my first question to you is, what lights you up?
What lights me up? Right now, it is meditation, Naam, Simran, like really connecting with the blessings and the wisdom that the gurus have passed on to us. I'm learning Nitname now, Japji Sahib, and yeah, the language or the alphabet or the scripture of Gurmukhi right now is really exciting for me. But with that, it connects, of course, to language, to vibration, sound, and frequency. Those are things that I've been working with for my own personal journey and in support and helping others for many years right now, and diving into sound, vibration, and frequency. That is what really excites me, besides many other things, but I think that is quite high on the list. Like just a couple of days ago, I sat for the full moon with some friends in ceremony, and we had different instruments. There were some gongs, I had my crystal bowls, flute, drums, rattles, and we tuned into our hearts, connected to intentions for the world right now, and allowed music, sound, and vibration to be orchestrated through us in harmonious ways with all five and then six of us that were together. And yeah, the sound took us on beautiful journeys within our bodies, within our emotions, and also feeling those ripples, yeah, connecting to many places of the earth. and beyond like geographic places on the earth, also rippling through time, meaning rippling into our ancestral consciousness, ancestral wisdom, maybe sometimes ancestral traumas to be cleared, basically with the intention to clear fragmentations from the past so that we can live a more harmonious present.
Yeah, thank you for sharing. It's so powerful that experience as you share it, and in the modern day, it's so funny because I'm coming from a corporate environment today, and to have this conversation, and the density, and of course all dense is ikonkar, so all realities are valid. But coming from one density, and then hearing you're talking about this, transcending time and connecting to these different things and unwinding, and we'll get into DNA activations hopefully as well. Um, is beautiful, and also not tr- I don't know how to use the word, maybe traditional, or the way we have been molded in modern Sikhism, and I'd like to get into that too, about connecting to these instruments, connecting to the heart. Why is that? Why is that so important, and how we can do that? But before we get into all of these, if you could share, and I know you did this section, Dr. Kamurup's live stream as well, but if you could share just a bit about your journey. How did you come from Austria to then going into grid activations?
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for this question, and thank you for holding space and initiating this conversation. I think there's so much that even us two can learn, and with other people listening to this, I think there's a lot that people can receive in terms of reflections about their own life. It's been, yeah, it's been a journey for sure. And both of our ancestors, all of our ancestors are from Punjab. My dad's family is from a Hindu family. He was born and raised in Delhi. And my mother is from a Sikh family. She was born in the geographically Pakistani part of Punjab. And when she was 3 years old, her family migrated to Singapore, and she was raised in Singapore. My parents met in Delhi, married in Singapore, and then moved to Austria. It's like a very brief version of how I ended up in Austria. I was conceived in Austria, was born in Singapore though, and then when I was 5 months old, back to Austria, and I was raised there, did all of my education there, my schooling there, and with like my mother, although she was Indian, Punjabi, Sikh, she was raised in Singapore and was very much identified as Singaporean. Somewhat was instilled into her like the colonial mindset, and she was wanting to be more from a more Western society than Indian society, a third world country, which you would call it in the 80s, right?
Mm.
Um, so she was very strongly identified as Singaporean, and that's what she passed on to me and to my sister as well. She was like, you are Singaporean." So that was how I grew up in my early childhood. When people would ask me, "Where are you from?" I would say Singapore. And then later on, growing up in Austria, there's like peer pressure, and somehow you want to fit in. You want to be part of the social circles, especially in adolescence. So I started identifying as Austrian, or figuring out what does it mean to be an Austrian as well. Because from being Singaporean citizen around the age of 10, I resigned that Singaporean citizen. It's a long story about why, but took Austrian citizenship. And then the identity, or the search for identity, more or less, um, pointed me into the direction of Austria, because that was the environment of my friend circles and the environment that I was living in. But then through some mystical experiences, some confrontations, not personal confrontations, but in the external world, confrontations with life and death, and some travel experiences, at some point I really felt the glory of my Indian heritage. And then with the age of like 18, 19, I had this very strong pull to go to India and find my guru. Like I really felt the glory of Indian spirituality, although I didn't know much about it, but I just felt there was something for me to connect with, to figure out, to guide me along my pathways. And that created a bit of a conflict situation with my family because they kind of came to the West with Western ideals that they wanted to pass on to me and to my sister, and then me wanting to let all of that go and go to India created some conflict within the family structures. And there were different initiations, I think, for all of the family members that we went through. And around that age, I felt a real pull to visit many places on the planet and travel, and also felt like I want to live abroad to experience other places, but somehow family karma always pulled me back to Austria. And then circumstances in my early 20s guided me into a way that I got initiated into an ancient Hindu tradition, a Bhakti yoga lineage. Um, a very small lineage in the West, not very well known at all, but through some divine orchestration, I would say, I got initiated by a guru in a Vaishnava lineage, but it was an Austrian person who had traveled to India and spent a lot of time with the sadhus in India. And so in my early 20s, I really devoted myself deeply into this traditional ancient yogic lineage. And the main thing that I received there was bhakti, devotion, the practice of devotional service. Like I remember exactly the words that my guru told me. He said, "You don't need to do anything for yourself, just do it for the divine." And that was the key that I needed to know for my life, because I felt there's something greater than the material life, the material approach to life, having a career, making a lot of money, having wealth, houses, cars. I was not interested in that, but when it was like, oh, you can be of service to something higher, that totally made sense. And that is still the foundation of my journey now, that devotional practice. And I studied physiotherapy in Austria, started my career as a physiotherapist with some other creative endeavors at that point, and then I wanted to start my own business as a physiotherapist, and felt because of certain citizenship issues, I hadn't traveled to Singapore for more than 20 years, but those issues were resolved. So I felt, oh, it's time to go to Singapore and visit the land of, or the place where my grandparents were living. So I visited Singapore, and then I looked at the map and was like, all right, let me see which is a nice place to have a little bit of holiday as well. So I said, oh, Bali is close by. Let me visit Bali. And I visited Bali for 3 weeks, and somehow life, miraculous orchestration, um, somehow made me move to Bali. And instead of starting my own business in Austria, I moved to Bali and started working as a physiotherapist, doing craniosacral work in Bali and teaching anatomy at yoga teacher trainings, and got involved into like a spiritual community there and learned transformational breath work, started my journey with sound healing there. And in Bali was also where a lot of the journey started, connecting to the grid lines, the ley lines, and the energy lines of the planet. Because there are different maps of energy lines, planetary energy lines, and one mapping shows that in Bali is a place where the masculine and the feminine planetary serpent lines intersect. Like we have from yogic tradition, we have Ida and Pingala, the moon and the sun channel, the feminine and the masculine channel, main energy channels that run from the base of our spine to our crown, so does the earth have energy channels. And what in one mapping system, these main masculine and feminine lines intersect in Bali. Bali is also the only Indonesian island that has maintained Hinduism, an animistic form of Hinduism, as their culture, religion, or tradition. It is a very special place. And from Bali, somehow life took turns. I was based there for a couple of years. But then, with my mom in Austria getting diagnosed with cancer, I left Bali and life spun me on a whirlwind tour for 5 years all across the planet. And on that journey all across the planet, I traveled to a lot of what you would call sacred sites or power points on the planet where there is an amplified energy, where there are ancient sacred sites like Machu Picchu in the Sacred Valley, the Mayan pyramids in Central America, the Hawaiian Islands, Uluru, Ayers Rock in Australia, many other places in Europe as well. And on that journey, I also connected a lot with indigenous cultures from all across the planet
Okay.
and started to understand how what Sikh people would call ik, the oneness,
Mm.
started to understand the oneness beyond time and space
Mm.
through the energy lines of the geography of the planet and how information is stored within the geography of the planet, like our personal history, collective human history, ancestral history, ancient, vast, ancient planetary history. Everything is stored as information, as vibration within the geography and geology of the planet. And that's what I started to somehow intuitively pick up on and learn and started to understand. And at the end of that whirlwind tour, life somehow spat me out here in the southwest of England, in Glastonbury. Um, and after leaving Bali as a home base, I wouldn't have envisioned myself living in India. I was thinking of a more like Mediterranean environment, a little bit warmer, a little bit more sun. But somehow I ended up here, and it's very karmic. There are many reasons for why I'm here right now, but maybe we can speak about that a little bit down the line. But there's a
Sure.
brief history of how I've ended up here in England.
Yeah.
And it's end of 2017, so it's been more than 7 years now that I've been here. And a lot has happened since I've gotten here. Yeah.
Hey everybody, sorry to interrupt your podcast, but if I could please ask you to take the time to like and subscribe to this channel. It would help us as we try to grow this channel and share our guests' deep wisdom with you and the rest of the world. What lights you up? Why do I ask this? Because I want to create a space for you to go slow to go far and offer a space of one-to-one coaching, and I'll put some testimonials up here. This will allow you to access all of the wisdom for our illuminating dialogues, actually integrate and implement this wisdom in your daily life for whatever means you'd like to transform, live in alignment, live in purpose, and of course live in your dharma. If that resonates with you, you can book a session directly with me on jhoty.com. If you would like to join the free community, you can also go to jhoty.com. All the links are in the description, and connect with like-minded people, where we also have a chat about the next Illuminating Dialogue podcast episodes. So thank you again, everybody, for supporting this podcast. I really do appreciate it, and I hope you enjoy the rest of this podcast. Thank you for sharing all of your journey. So much you've done internal work, which obviously have resulted in your external explorations. And as you were speaking, I resonate to the start of your story, where you were saying you felt a pull. I did feel a pull 2 years ago to go to India, and And I went, and many people watching to this, they feel this pull inside. But like we were saying, there's some family karma, or we might feel this. I think it's called ego construct, or you were mentioning colonialism. And for people who are not familiar, it's from what I've researched, it's not just colonialism, but there's a whole thinking system embedded in that. There's a way of life embedded in that. There's a whole different reality versus the other reality that we talked in Illuminating Dialogues 36 about how the whole solar system is geometrically set up, how Earth is set up for us to continually aspire and grow. And people listening from certain traditional backgrounds might actually get slightly triggered hearing breath work or yoga or different, and just understanding that they're all different modalities and forms of unlocking different layers of ourselves, and is constantly learning. So even as you were saying that, I was also feeling these small belief systems inside me that I went through as well. So also just noticing how many belief systems, consciously or unconsciously, that you went through. Um, so yeah, I'm just very grateful for you for sharing. Um, Before we get into UK and what did you find after landing here, I'm really curious about if you could let us know about these ancient indigenous cultures. You mentioned animism, you mentioned like Egypt or Mayan pyramids. Um, ha- because I'm coming from very Sikh like UK background, and I've always and we talked to some shamans on the podcast. Still, for me, there's a bit of a I'm not really quite understanding the link, or how the shamanistic practices like animism work. How do we connect to these ancient structures? Because I was in Greece, sitting at the Parthenon, also Iona in Scotland, and I intuitively felt like Harmandir Sahib as well, right? Or Dharamsala. I intuitively felt very strong energy there, and I sat. Something made me sit there for a long time. But if you could share also with the viewers about a bit deeper about the indigenous cultures, how they interacted with their animism, how does that relate to Sikhi, and also what did you find at these ancient structure points or grids around the world?
Yeah, thank you for this question. And it's an interesting reflection because now, as you see me, I'm really following a Sikh path, but that only got initiated maybe 5 years ago. And my journey beforehand, there were, as I shared, the yogic tradition. When I was 4 years, I actually also was baptized into Catholicism. But it was never like a religious or a real spiritual quest. It was more something social to
Mm,
fit in society in Austria. Yeah, so there can be maybe confusion if people have grown up in a very like traditional household, if it's Sikhi or any other tradition, where certain things are accepted and maybe other things don't find that much acceptance. But connecting to indigenous cultures and maybe also ancient cultures, one big aspect is maybe I'll start with when I grew up in school. What we were taught was, oh, the humans are probably there's only intelligent life form on planet Earth. We're not sure if there's any intelligent life form out there in this whole great infinite universe, which now seems quite a ridiculous statement to me. But we were brought up, or I was brought up in a very like narrow mindset of consciousness, a very material world where everything only that we can touch or what we can prove has validation. But then growing up and going into my own spiritual practice of meditation and working with sound as well, I learned to understand that there are so many much more subtle realms of creation and of existence that maybe we, with our human senses, initially can't perceive. but because we can't perceive them, it doesn't make them less real or less true or non-existent. And so in these workings, connecting to like indigenous cultures and ancient civilizations, one important aspect is they all have a cosmology, which means they all have a relationship to the cosmos. And in many indigenous cultures and ancient civilizations, um, the saying is that life on planet Earth was seeded or originated from the cosmos. And if you look at like the pyramids in Central America or the Great Pyramids in Cairo, in Egypt, or if you look at other like sacred sites, Machu Picchu, also the landscape here around Glastonbury, um, all these structures are very, very precisely aligned with celestial constellations. If you look at Stonehenge, for example, is very much aligned with the rising or the setting sun and the solstices. So there is a strong awareness and connection to the consciousness of our life on planet Earth being strongly and deeply connected to what is happening in the cosmos and in the solar system. And as you shared previously, briefly, we are spinning on this globe, planet Earth, around our own axis, but then around the sun. And then there are other planets that are spinning around the sun, and then the sun is spinning within the galaxy around the center of the galaxy. So if we look at, again, vibration and frequency, but like subtle electromagnetic vibrations and frequencies, and again, the concept of ik, of oneness, how everything is connected, of course, it makes sense that like what is happening on other planets influences what is happening on planet Earth. Where the solar system is traveling within the galaxy will influence what happens on planet Earth. That's why you have ancient wisdom like Vedic astrology or other forms of astrology or the Mayan calendar, which are ways of calculating time through our relationship with the celestial constellations. So that was very significant along my journey, I feel, to have or to receive that understanding of how everything is infinitely and immaculately connected and related. So there are no coincidences. Everything is part of a infinitely, divinely, perfectly, precisely orchestrated synchronicity upon synchronicity upon synchronicity. That's my understanding now of reality. Another thing that really um, was important for me, and that also bridges somehow the journey into Sikhi, I think, was um, being initiated in like a Hindu path of spirituality, a yogic tradition. That path of spirituality was very transcendental, which means if you could describe it as like in a direction, spirituality was very much upward directed, like into transcendence, um, liberating yourself from the physical into like the transcendence, liberating yourself from Maya. Yeah. And then in the wisdom of like the indigenous cultures, it's in the other direction. There, the wisdom resides in the connection with the earth, in the connection with the wind, the water, the fire, the earth, the elements, in the connection with nature, and seeing how we are not only related, but we are dependent upon nature and we are dependent on our relationship with Mother Earth. So that was something from that very transcendental approach of spirituality. Like I connected or was able to tap into very earth-based ways of connecting to spirituality as well. And Then on the journey, some are ending up here in the UK. Sikhi came into my life, and maybe we'll get into how that happened a little bit later. But Sikhi is exactly the bridge between both of those for me, which is that transcendental experience of the divine, but living it here and now, embodied as humans on planet Earth in relationship with all of humanity and with all of the ecosystems and all of existence on planet Earth. So it is exactly that bridge that bridges that transcendental approach to the very earth-based approach and connects it all and fuses it all together.
Amazing. I really relate so much to what you shared. I think I've been through some breath work, for example, and I was also thinking that our goal is to escape Maya, because when I read Gurbani, it's like Maya, 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 and then I was like, okay, so my goal is to escape. And then as I started looking more, and also Dr. Kamarup said in the podcast, now is to hold on to your heart, the charan, and then I thought, okay, that's a pathway. And then also I was looking at the in Scotland, because I'm born here, so I was very interested in ancestry here, like Christianity, also paganism, and how do they connect to the land, and how is that a form of spirituality? But there's one energy of the gurus that is just so unique, and also Guru Gobind Singh, he has like a very powerful energy, like the king energy, and it's very unique. And yeah, I find that bridge as well. Like, it's just something very special about that energy, and all of the gurus. Um, yeah, and it's just very interesting how all the cultures as well have their own energy. So before we go into the grid activations of UK, could you share a bit more about what are DNA activations, and how, and perhaps also the animism of the shamans? What does that really mean?
Yeah, so maybe let's start with like the animism, which is as I shared with our confined human senses, there's only a specific spectrum of light frequencies that we are able to see as humans. There's only a specific spectrum of sound frequencies that we are able to hear as humans. But beyond that, there are other light frequencies that are existent, there are other sound frequencies that are existent, and as I shared previously, there are more subtle realms of existence that with our normal human senses we possibly or probably can't tap into. But if we expand our consciousness, if we work maybe with plant medicines, then those senses expand as well, and we can tap into more subtle layers of consciousness. And in animistic cultures, shamanistic cultures, that's what the medicine men or the medicine women relate to and connect to, like the spirits of the ancestors, maybe the spirits of the forest, or the spirits of the ocean, and their ways of connecting to those subtle frequencies, subtle from our human perception, but very powerful at the same time, and work with them. So there's like the animistic way of working with like the subtle energies of our existence. And when I speak about DNA activations, again, we bridge into that concept of like time and space, right? When I grew up in school, what we learned was, oh, we get a set of DNA from our mother and a set of DNA from our father, and that's what makes who we are. We have learned now, which is a few decades later, that DNA is very malleable. DNA gets shaped through life experiences, through trauma, through exalted states of consciousness. So every speck of what we experience is somehow stored within our DNA. And not only what we experience, but also what our parents experienced, what our grandparents experienced, what our great grandparents experienced. All of our ancestral experiences are stored within our DNA. And so, in the work with sound, vibration, and frequency, we can connect to those experiences. There's something also known as the Akhashic records or the Akhashic field, which is like the compendium of information that is stored on humanity, on individuals, on the planet, which is stored and that can be accessed through sound, vibration, and frequency. And we can shift layers within the Akashic records, which reflects within our DNA, which means we can clear trauma, we can clear fragmentation, we can find forgiveness with the past so that we can come into a more embodied, harmonious state within ourselves. So that in a very brief way is explained what DNA activations relates to. And for me, one of my main modality of how I work with it or facilitate is with sound, vibration, and frequency, with plant medicines as well. And also, since I've embarked on my journey with Sikhi, that is what Naam does and what mantra does. Yeah, because it's a vibration that purifies, like the Mool mantra, right? Like it clears karma through the ages.
Satnam Karta Purkh Nirbhav Nirvair Akal Ajuni Saibham Gur Prasad.
And that karam is stored within our DNA. And if we look at DNA, there's a certain density to which scientists maybe can do their research right now. But beyond that density, it goes into the infinite and infinite and infinite microcosm. And if we go to that infinite, it's again infinite and infinite and infinite beyond that, the microcosm of existence, in the same way the macrocosm. So scientists maybe now can prove in regards to what happens within our DNA. If we go another 5-10 years into the future, they will be able to research much smaller aspects and fractals and fragments of that DNA structure. So just the awareness of, yeah, the infinite intricacy of what makes us human and what makes us who we are connected to all of existence. So yeah, that's maybe the best way of how I could explain it now, but
Yeah,
I hope it makes sense and resonates in some form.
yeah, it really does. And I think it's really amazing how you explained it. And especially we had a previous one with Atma Singh. We were talking about DNA from a mathematical perspective, like 5 and 6 layers, and then rotating in 108 degrees, and how at that level we're a fractal, and then all the layers, macro, microcosm, we're fractals, and it's amazing to intellectually know this stuff, but actually like to experience it, and that's just another level. So if you could explain like Nam as well, because Um, like going into shamanism, I don't know, do they have a form of Naam? Going into the more transcendent thing, is that Naam, or is Naam something that's unique to Sikhi?
I think Naam is something that is present in many cultures, in many vibrations, in different forms. Like chanting in the Muslim tradition, Muslim culture, they chant holy names. In the Hawaiian tradition, they chant. In South American Amazonian traditions, the Shipibo tradition, they chant, and the chants are called Ikaros there. And through my understanding or how I have experienced it, right, we have language, right? And language is a means of communication on how we can speak with each other so we can understand each other from an intellectual perspective. But language beyond an intellectual, beyond an intellectual understanding, language also transmits a vibration and a frequency. Right? Punjabi is very different to Hindi, for example. Like a different frequency. If Punjabi people speak and Hindi people speak, is a different vibration. If you have people speaking German, a lot of people say German sounds relatively harsh and abrupt. And if you look at German culture, German society is very punctual, is very mechanic. Things are about functioning properly. If you look at the Spanish language or any Latin language, it has more fire, it's more embodied in like the pelvic area, right? There's a different vibration which also reflects in the culture. So language is not only something that we can understand with our mind, but it's also something that transmits a frequency, a vibration, culture, society. It influences all of that. So that is all through my experience and my research with sound, vibration, and frequency. And then when we look at how we speak, is vowels and consonants that are connected, which create syllables. The syllables create words. The words are in our expression. We can understand them with our intellect. But beyond us being able to understand words with our intellect, they also transmit like a frequency or a vibration. Yeah, and if we look at more like subtle levels of our embodiment, again from a yogic perspective, we look at our energy channels, our nadis, the Ida, Pingala, Shushumna, our Kundalini energy. When we utter Naam, when we utter mantra, yeah, it is not only we are saying what the Naam or the mantra means, but also with the tongue, with the rooftop of the mouth, with our vocal cords, with our diaphragm, with our breath, we are connecting energy circuits within the subtle embodiment of our human existence. And these repetitive connections of these energy circuits, they facilitate purification within the nadis, within the energy meridians. And that's how Naam works. So when we say Wahe Guru, for example, is a very specific way of how we receive the energy through our navel point. It travels down to the root, we lift it to the heart, from the throat up through the third eye and crown. So it purifies our central energy channel. So each mantra has a very specific energy signature in how energy circuits within our embodiment are purified and connected. So that's how I experience Naam and mantra these days, and also in the Hindu tradition, in Islamic traditions, in shamanic traditions. There are other mantras that are used, but the effects or how they work, the principles, they are similar.
Mm. And what is the effect of Waheguru Mantar specific for Sikhi? Has it been in design in such a way?
I think it is not specific for Sikhi. I think Waheguru is universal.
Mm.
But of course, it has been transmitted through the Sikh lineage, but it is beyond. I think it's an interesting reflection here because you say specifically Sikhi, but the gurus, they were not about Sikhi, they were about humanity.
Mm.
They were about the oneness of humanity, the oneness of existence. So Waheguru is something I feel, or mantra that benefits anyone and everyone. So it's not specifically for people that follow the Sikh path, and everyone that utters it and goes into jap and meditation with it will feel the benefits of it. And what it does, it really purifies our central energy channel and connects us with the divine within us that connects us to the divine that is all of existence.
Nice. Thank you for expanding my consciousness. Is a hard habit. um, so I would love for us to share about the different scripts. So last time we talked about Gurmukhi in a glyph setting, and how that has a almost grounding, and also the Devanagari script or Sanskrit. Could you also maybe speak into that and your experiences with Gurmukhi as a script, and then maybe we
Yeah,
can then get into Latin and UK.
yeah. Um, yeah, as I shared previously, for me, in my experience, Sikhi, which is connected to Gurumukhi and the script and the utterances, very much is a bridge of that transcendental expression or experience of the divine to a very embodied experience of the divine, is the bridge that connects both of these aspects. And previously, when I was following a Hindu tradition, I was using mantras in Sanskrit.
Mm.
And as I shared this, the direction was upwards, very transcendental. And starting to utter Gurumukhi, I really felt it helps and supports me to be here, to be in my body. There's no pathway out. It really brings me here into the now moment, into my embodiment. And um, this is also through my connection with Dr. Kamarup Singh. That's how I've received a lot and how I've learned a lot as well. If you look at Gurumukhi, it is related to Sanskrit, but it is very much related to the runes as well, which is the ancient script of like the Nordic lands of Scandinavia, probably also here on the British Isle, and it holds something what I would call is something very elemental. Like it is, it brings us here. It's more simplified, but it is somehow more. It feels more ancient and more embodied to me. It is not like Sanskrit, for example, is very like feels like it's out there
Floaty, yeah, yeah.
floating, and Gurmukhi is like
Mm.
here and now, brings us into the present here and now. And that's like the quality that I feel with Gurumukhi and how it's been transcribed like along the journey, working with sound as well. You might have heard of it, or maybe other listeners have heard of something called what people call light language,
Yeah.
where people channel different languages that help people to purify, to remember, to clear karma, to heal. And I feel what the gurus have transcribed with Gurumukhi is a fully identified and fully transcribed light language, where, as I shared, each consonant, each vowel, each syllable that gets created is not only something to be understood with our mind, but it is something that activates an energy circuit within our physical and more subtle embodiment. And that's is a phenomenal treasure that has been passed on to us.
Amazing as you explain that, because I've looked into like languages, like they have like the Palladian ones or Arcturian ones, and they do seem like very different, almost like Egyptian-esque, sounds like that. But then even when I was like learning Punjabi at Punjabi school, I never I never had that connection. You know, if I did, I would be so honored. But like knowing this now, it's just like it holds it in a completely different light. But then seeing how the vowels or the writing has been split up also affects it, right? Because when we used to write Gurmukhi, like in the Guru Granth Sahib, used to be all joined up, I believe, and now it's a bit separated. So does that also have an effect on the way we read or write?
I am sure it does have an effect, but I have to say that I am still relatively in the beginning phase
Mm.
of learning and studying. Um, so I couldn't go deeper into that. But I'm sure that how it has been transcribed originally by the gurus is the original way of how it's supposed to be.
Yeah.
Like what they shared, the wisdom and knowledge came from a whole different level that probably nowadays we can't fully comprehend.
Yeah.
Or very few can fully comprehend and explain these layers.
Amazing. And what comes to mind is just you were talking about grounding and runes, and I feel like intuitively, because in Kal Yuga it's like a more heavier density, so it feels like more appropriate to have a more grounded language in this kind of time.
Yes, I think that's very true and a very important point that you brought in. Um, as we in Kali Yuga right now, where everything is dense as it gets, and we can't be airy fairy and out there if we wanna survive and thrive in this density. We need something that strengthens us from inside and allows us to be strong within this density and be fully spiritual and connected within this density. And that's an immense blessing that has been passed on by the gurus. And as you shared about Guru Gobind Singh Ji Maharaj and the Khalsa, yeah, what has been passed on, like the warrior fraternity, is a real gift for these times in Kali Yuga right now.
Mm. And if we could also talk about that essence, but in UK, about perhaps what you've been exploring with regards to Avalon and King Arthur and Knights of the Round Table. A lot of people growing up in UK might have found that as myths, but as we know, during colonialization of UK, a lot of ancient myths, a lot of the ancient languages, like the Picts here in Scotland, and all of the ancient runes kind of got taken away and the history got rewritten. So I'm wondering, what could you share about the ancient Druidic times here? And I'm particularly interested in Scotland, but also the rest of the UK, and also up to like King Arthur and perhaps some of the chalices. For us, we've seen it in myth, but we don't really know how that's actually related to the history of the islands that we live on.
Yeah, it's an interesting question, right? Where's the truth between mythology and history? And as you shared, a lot of history was erased intentionally probably, so it would be easier to rule the population. But if we look at like the Druidic wisdom or the pagan wisdom of these lands here, there are still fragments left and that we can connect to, like the ancient stone circles, Stonehenge, Avebury, Stanton Drew, and many smaller ones here in England. I'm sure there are many in Scotland as well, on the islands as well. And as I shared at the very beginning, these stone circles are very much aligned with celestial constellations and times of the year as well. The Druids are said to have built these stone circles, the ancient wisdom keepers of these lands. Paganism, again, similar to what actually Hinduism is, right? Is also a form of paganism where there are many different gods that represent different aspects of reality and of creation, where one would honor and worship the seasons, the cycle of the year, the solstices, the equinoxes. Like right now in Avalon, there are eight seasons that are celebrated and initiated here in Glastonbury. So you have the equinoxes and the solstices, and 6 weeks in between equinox and solstice is another season that comes in, and is the goddess that is honored. The goddess is Mother Earth, and in each one of these 8 seasons, the goddess comes in a different dress. And that's because Mother Nature presents itself in different shades and in different colors. Every 6 weeks, you see, like in winter is this very bare, the minimum. Then you see Imbolc, beginning of February is when the first snowdrops appear out of the ground, is the first gentle emergence of spring. So these ancient cultures connected to the land, they were very much connected to the cycle of the year and to nature, and would live in harmony with nature as much as possible. Now, if we look at modern society, winter solstice, which is like the shortest day, the longest night, just around Christmas, which should be the most still time, the most peaceful time of the year, becomes the most hectic time, becomes the most hectic time of the year. Is unfortunate. Like the rhythms are not fully in sync anymore. And I think that was what the ancient ones, not only of these lands, but of any lands, the indigenous ones, they still have that in awareness. We have to synchronize with nature, because although we are modern humans and live in a developed society, we are still part of nature. We are not separate from nature. We are part of that oneness, that ecosystem of planet Earth. Although we can have Zoom calls and digital devices that can assist us on our journey, depending where we want to go, we are still part of that cycle. We still need food, we still need the sunlight, we still need water to drink. So we are not separate from nature. And I think that is like something very fundamental that we have to remember. And I think that was what the ancient ones had awareness of.
Amazing. I feel like I've been on my journey of like understanding, like you said, Hinduism, paganism. I feel like they're worshipping effectively the same gods, but they're just like personified through their culture, through the way the earth spoke to them through their language or nature. But then, like the way I've been, obviously through the lens of Sikhi here in UK, for me it was like I was trying to understand Ayurveda, but I've seen it very separate because I was like, okay, that's more like pagan, and so I was like trying to like connect. How does Sikhi fit into like? So I find that also like really interesting dynamic. But then knowing that it is embodied, like we said, it's embodied. It's like yeah, an embodied tradition, and that's kind of been a journey for me personally. Um, And what's been your experience with the ley lines here in UK? Exploring that, you mentioned at the start the heart chakra of the world, and I'm just wondering, is there some changes in UK happening at the present? What are really these ley lines? When I was researching, I seen those different ley lines going into Bali. I seen that Stonehenge is actually connected in Scotland. I think we have like a pentagon, 5 actually major ley lines that then connect south into England. And I believe you also you went to Rosalind Chapel in Edinburgh, which is also, I've not been yet, although I live quite close by. I heard that's also a ley line. So if you could maybe share with us about your experience in here in UK.
Yeah, so ley lines, grid lines is something that is known in many traditions. Like in the Far Eastern tradition, they call them dragon lines. In the Indigenous culture of Australia, they call the ley lines song lines, because there's an awareness that the energy travels through sound, vibration, and frequency. And a friend of mine, he does a lot of research around ley lines, and one of his teachers, Rory Duff, I believe is his name, he says, like we think ley lines is something that is a straight line and is constantly existent in the same form. But ley lines, energy lines are not straight lines. They are usually, they wind, very often they come in pairs. Like in our energetic embodiment, there's a masculine and a feminine pair, and they are also malleable, which means through shifts within the geology of the earth, the ley lines can shift, which shifts through human influence, the ley lines or the energies can shift. And I think 2 forms of ley lines, or what could create a ley line, is underground water flow or underground crystal veins in the geology of the stones of the earth that are underground, because through crystalline structure and through water, energy gets transmitted in amplified ways. So
I think what comes to mind there is 2 things. We spoke about this in the podcast previously about the water and amplifying. One is Kandi Dipal, so like obviously Amrit, and then the other is Punjab. So Punjab, I'm just wondering about the ley lines and how the Takhts were established. And it seems to me that Punjab, because it's Punjab with a lot of water, that must have some ley lines.
oh, for sure. And also it's like borders on the foothills of the Himalayas. Like I was in Anandpur Sahib last year, and I mean, just seeing the mountains there, Naina Devi, and the water, the emerald green water that flows down there is phenomenal. The power of the land there. I was just enamored by the magic and the soft gentleness, yet strong and fierce beauty and love of that land. So there's definitely energy lines, and where the ducts were built or grounded or founded, there's definitely something very specific on why those places were chosen, which I haven't been able to do much research on yet. But who knows? This journey is still ongoing. It might happen at some point.
Nice.
Yeah.
And
Here,
yeah,
sorry, go ahead.
no, you continue. So good.
I was just wanting to share like the main ley lines that I've connected to here in the UK are known as the Michael and the Mary line, which go from the furthest eastern part of England. I think is Suffolk or Norfolk, but I believe they enter through Suffolk from the coast
Okay.
all the way to Cornwall. and they go through Oxfordshire, they go through Somerset, Devon, Cornwall, and many places in between, Wiltshire, um, and many places they intersect, and wherever they intersect nowadays usually is a church.
Yes, I was reading a book and I forgot who wrote it. It was something about the ley lines, and it was like there used to be pagan temples there with like the trees, and then the yeah, it was replaced by churches in the same spot for social reasons, but also metaphysical reasons. So I thought that was
Yeah.
quite interesting.
Yes, and if you want to like convert a society to a new belief, you will choose the places where these people would gather naturally and just use those places and just build the new place of worship in the new faith. Um, and also, I believe that early Christianity was somehow infiltrated by Druids,
Hmm.
and therefore there was an awareness, or is an awareness, of the energy lines of the earth and which places hold and facilitate amplified energy to build places of worship. But then another thing that I learned about ley lines is that, or places of worship or sacred sites, one aspect that makes a place a sacred site or place of higher vibrational frequency is the energy of the land. But the second aspect is human consciousness. So at a place where humans continuously gather in prayer, in meditation, in worship, automatically that place will hold a high frequency, and that high frequency will get anchored into the land as well. So it goes both ways, meaning that what we as humans do also has an effect on the energy of the land.
Mm.
Yeah, does that make sense?
Yeah, this puts a whole different aspect of the importance of group meditation, collective meditation. And again, it's not using the land as a resource, as extraction, it's actually the reciprocal understanding.
Exactly.
Um, that's amazing. Um, and I was just wondering as well about Dr. Kamarup. We did talk about this. We didn't actually go too much deeper, but it was actually about the Freemasons. So I was wondering what about the Freemasons in Rosslyn Chapel, and also there might be people watching this from a British background, or it could be British, um, Indian, or wherever background, and they could be interested in. Um, okay, we had the Druids, then we had the Christians and the Romans, and trying to understand what was that interplay and kind of where did Freemasons come from, what were they doing in Rosalind's chapel, and then later what was their effect in like Punjab or in Sikhi as well.
Yeah, so from my understanding, as I shared, the Druids somehow infiltrated early Christianity as well. And one aspect was as well to share their knowledge and wisdom to somehow protect the sacred sites.
Mm.
So Druids also are known as master builders
Mm.
because they have an awareness of the energy of the land and of sacred geometry. And if you look at cathedrals these days, ancient cathedrals, churches, they are aligned with the energy of the land. And there's also sacred geometry within the construction of a cathedral. Like very close to where I live is Wells Cathedral, and it's a phenomenal building. And there's so much magic in that building. Um, and there has to be some high consciousness or high wisdom around construction and building in alignment with the land and with sacred geometry to make that possible. And then as time passed, I think there were different fractions of like the Druids that became Christians that then turned into like different maybe Masonic lodges, what you could call them. And some maybe more out for their own benefit, others more out for a collective benefit, but is part of now what you would call secret societies. I think that control more or less undercover and under the current of what is running the planet right now. Like if you look at Washington DC, for example, or you look at the city of London, it's very specifically constructed and built in a certain way, like the important buildings, like the Pentagon, for example, is it's five corners, and I'm sure there's some alignment with the land as well, why it was built there. If you look at London, for example, I was blessed to go on some water pilgrimages in London, where we connected to the underground water flow underneath the city of London to different springs and wells that reside in London. And as I shared before, where there's water flow, there's an amplified energy circulation. But most of the springs and wells in London are in official buildings, like the Royal Court of Justice. The Australian Embassy, I know, holds a spring as well. So these places of power, kind of like of political power, social, economic power, claimed these places of geologic power. When I was in New York a few years ago, what I learned there was that where Wall Street was built was the most sacred place for the Indigenous on the island of Manhattan. So they had their most sacred place of worship was where Wall Street was built. So there is some intentional influence on controlling like the earth energies through the wisdom of the connection of the energy of the earth through the Masonic lodges, one could say, and that maybe ties back to what happened in Punjab, was where there was Masonic influence. Is a high intelligence, high awareness on how certain small fragments of the scriptures in Sikhi were changed, certain small parts were taken out. So Sikhi was disempowered to certain extents. Just maybe to share directly, I feel our society, culture, economy is very much controlled. It's not like free for everyone to thrive in the same way, but there are certain aspects of our reality that have been manipulated and that are controlled, and that is what I mentioned or we spoke about very briefly in the very beginning is like a colonial mindset, and it's not like colonialism in terms of conquering a country and bringing in a belief, but it happens with the people of the own country as well. It's more a mindset and a way of controlling than going to another country and controlling another country only. It's a way of controlling culture and society for the benefit of a few and not for the greater good of all. Yeah, does that make sense?
Thank you for explaining. This is what's really about the podcast is about. It's like building up slowly, like with the metaphysical understanding, so we can get to a point of understanding this wider perspective, because it's very hard to understand a wider perspective if we've we've not been able to understand like what's Ayurveda, right? And
Yeah,
then like in episode 36 with Atma Singh, we talked about how the pentagram is like a core aspect of reality, like fiveness emerging, and how it's not necessarily good or bad, like to have a pentagram or whatever structure, like in DNA. But these, like you shared, it's about like discernment, like whether that area would be controlled or whether it's used as a reciprocal exchange, you know?
exactly.
Because often we can be like, oh, okay, there's water there, there's a building, and it's bad. But it's like, it's more, we need more discernment there. And is that locking our consciousness or is it expanding our consciousness? And I think when we begin to understand how we can develop our consciousness, then we can also able to understand the converse, how our consciousness can become locked in these certain metaphysical ways. So I remember there was like also a Masonic house of Patiala, so it's quite interesting how knowing that level of metaphysics, people are able to look at other cultures that they maybe don't even are not familiar with, and then able to recognize the power dynamics and then shift that. I just find that personally very interesting. Of course, in our tradition, sad, but I find it quite interesting how that level of consciousness you're able to do these things. Um, so anyway, I won't ramble too much.
Oh, it's phenomenal.
Yeah,
As I shared, there's like a lot of knowledge, very high intelligence in these ways of navigating, like a lot of knowledge of these metaphysical aspects that you spoke about.
yeah. We were speaking about actually outside of this conversation podcast, I was speaking to somebody as well on the importance of metaphysics and language. And on the podcast again, Dr. Atma Singh broke down ancient Hebrew and Aramaic, and he was taking us through the journey. And viewers can watch that if they haven't watched it, about how the actual glyphs were like back to front, the sound forms of Latin actually, and like kappa, capitalism, capital, actually locked us in a certain mindset of like more control rather than a hierarchy, rather than the circular approach. So I find it so interesting that just the language, the vowels, the alphabet, the sentence structure in our day to day work or whatever, it's like really amazing. Um,
Is phenomenal. Like if you look at English as a language as well,
yes, yes.
which is mixed up from like Alemannic, German roots, Latin roots. Um, yeah, and if we look at the etymology of different words and what we are actually saying when we utter certain words, is very is interesting to do research into that, and how the whole like legal system as well
Mm,
is, if I may share, like how the whole legal system is very much about language, and it's not about being a good or a bad person, but it is about how we say certain things and what we say. It's
mm,
not about being a person of integrity and truth, and that I want to tie something back to King Arthur again, and
yes,
Excalibur and the Sword of Truth,
please.
because I had an experience beginning of 2020. Spoke about language just now, and beginning of 2020 in the UK, as someone following the Sikh faith, we are allowed to carry kirpans, which are daggers or swords for spiritual purposes. So I took a 3 foot kirpan to the Glastonbury Abbey, was permitted entrance the first time and was there in meditation. The second time when I was there, somebody freaked out, called the police. The kirpan got confiscated and I had to go to court. I was prosecuted, I was convicted, and that was beginning of 2020.
Mm,
Um, the funny thing is, the Glastonbury Abbey where all of this happened, the logo of the Glastonbury Abbey is a sword. And they claim, although there are no historic facts around that, that King Arthur was buried at the Glastonbury Abbey. And King Arthur, again, is about Excalibur, the sword of truth, very much the similar principles as the Khalsa has. It's about truth and integrity, righteousness. So with that whole story, I got into like the legal system and really found out what a show it is, to be honest, from my experience, where it is not about are you a good person, are you a bad person, are you righteous or are you not righteous. I'm not saying that it is never about that, but very often it can be twisted not to be about that. But it is really how do you say something and what is said in which way, which makes someone guilty or not guilty. And it was a really interesting experience because for me, when I came to Glastonbury, before I connected to my Sikh heritage, I was very much connecting to King Arthur, Excalibur, the Sword of Truth, like that mythology. And then when I got my connection to Sikhi, when that got reignited, I really felt how is same, but different. Excalibur, the Sword of Truth, a Mool Mantar, the first Mantar of truth as well. The Kirpan, the Shastar is something sacred, something honorable. So for me, that whole experience, when the Kirpan got confiscated, I felt like, oh, the Sword of Truth is in a system that proclaims to be about truth, but isn't really about truth. Something funny is going to happen. And lo and behold, 1 month later, lockdown, forced vaccinations, and the whole shebang that happened since 2020, where now, fortunately, from my perspective, more and more people are waking up and are seeing, oh, we are, as humans, as humanity, we are being played and manipulated by an elite that holds a lot of capital, holds a lot of power, and it's not about truth. The media is not about truth. The whole economic systems is not about truth, and it's not is like the opposite of the principles of what the guru shared, to be honest. Is about the benefit of a few on the cost of many. And it's not about what the guru shared, which was serve everyone like you would serve yourself. We are one humanity, there's one consciousness, so there's no separation, there's no one more worth or less worth than anyone else. And so that was a very deep dive for me, beginning of 2020, in connection with the ancient mythology of these lands, King Arthur, the Knights of the Round Table, but connecting to the wisdom that has been passed on by the gurus to us. And with the Khalsa and Guru Gobind Singh Ji Maharaj.
Amazing. And it's amazing as you share that, so ironic that you were in the church of Excalibur and Truth. Bhagoti, right? Bhagoti,
Exactly.
Durham, and your Kirpan was confiscated. What a synchronistic event. Um, and I never connected to King. I don't even know. Sadly, I'm from these islands, born here. I don't really know what King Arthur stood for, and what was his whole reason for being King Arthur. Was it? I know that Excalibur, only a truthful person could pull it out, but I don't really know the importance, significance. Is it like Bhagoti, righteous sword of Durham? Is that like
Yeah.
the underlying principles of the land here, like indigenously? Like what was the background behind that?
It is the same principle of righteousness and truthfulness. Um, like no there is no historic factual knowledge or wisdom of when and where King Arthur resided. Um, but it's a mythology, and from my understanding of reality, yeah, mythology and truth and history is very, very interconnected and intersected and overlapping and overlaying. But in the stories that have been shared, King Arthur is at a time where Christianity starts to come into the lands. And the old beliefs, the pagan beliefs, where there was a belief and a connection to the other world, to the fae and the fairy realm, that was about to be pushed aside. And King Arthur was that righteous, true king that was his intention was to bridge both of that, to keep the old alive and honor the new at the same time.
Okay, that's amazing. So he was like a guardian of Dharam in a way, in the mythology,
Yeah,
and
yeah.
I feel like that's one of the things that this modern culture we've stripped away the mythology, and I mean, once you've stripped away a mythology, you can replace it with any narrative or headline. But the mythology is so deep that it connects to our heart and the universe itself. And I was looking into the ancient Scotland people, the Picts. The Romans named them the Picts, but like we were talking about, the unicorn is like chained on the passport. So I'm also wondering, like, what was Scotland's role in the ancient lands here? Because I was reading into the Scottish kings and where Gaelic came from, and the Romans had to keep the Highlanders out. But there was something special about the ancient Scottish people, that they were never conquered. They had this deep form of spirituality. They also had a deep form of warriorhood, where both women and men would go into battle. So, also, like, if you found any land differences between like Scotland and England, and how
Mm.
that was represented at the Union of Crowns, because I think that starts to play into today, where we are now living here in this time period, but as like descendants of Punjab. I think it's important to understand how it got to be as it is.
Yeah, it's interesting because like what we learned in school, that is my belief, is a small speck and fragment of reality. And as you might have heard, the history books are usually written by the victors,
Oh yeah.
right? And they create history. That is what then gets shared as the truth of what happened. But I think we as humans, to be honest, have no clue what really happened on this planet. From evolution theory to like linear history that has been shared with us, um, land masses have been swallowed and have been spat out somewhere else. The tectonic plates have shifted around. I feel civilizations have risen and have fallen. Like these days, we have the Great Pyramids in Egypt, we have the pyramids in Central America.
In China.
Historians can't fully explain what happened. How did that high Egyptian civilization suddenly disappear? How did the Mayan civilization suddenly disappear? So, to be honest, we have just a speck of a clue as humans.
Mm.
Maybe some that have kept some books alive somewhere know a little bit more, but I feel there is much more that happened on planet Earth in any sacred book, in any mythology. There's always a great flood, right? A great flood that comes, that wipes out a lot. So I feel civilizations have risen and have fallen. There's the mythology of ancient Atlantis, there's the mythology of ancient Lemuria, and I'm tying that back because you say, oh, what was the history, or what is the difference between Scotland and England? And I visited a beach here on the south coast of England, and on one side of the beach, all of the stones and the rocks were red, and on the other side, they were all brown. So I asked this guy, do you have an idea what the reason is? And funnily enough, that guy was a geologist.
Oh, wow.
And so he explained, yeah, because this was from an ancient desert and this was from an ancient, I don't remember what it was. But then he went further on. He said, do you know actually that England, Scotland, and Wales are completely different land masses as well, geologically?
I know Scotland is, but I didn't know Wales because we have the Highland Fault. Yeah.
Yeah, so what he told me was that the closest that land that Scotland is related to on the planet is New Zealand. The closest land that Wales is related to on the planet is Japan. And that the English part of the Great British Isle is made up of many fractals of far more ancient land masses that have somehow been fused together. So if we just look at this one island of Great Britain and the geology, and we try to tap into the history of that geology, we probably have to admit that we don't know much at all.
Yeah, it reframes your whole perspective and worldview as you're connecting to these lands, and it speaks to the intuition part of it. Because if we're using our
Yeah,
minds versus using the intuition, we can gain a lot more from it.
exactly.
It's amazing, and it feels like the people in Britain right now need a bit of healing in the collective, especially with everything that's going on. So I think this work is quite important for that as well.
Yeah, that people really beyond connecting like to society and culture and economic system that is not really connected to the land, like really connecting to the land and learning to receive wisdom and guidance intuitively through the connection with the land. And as you shared, there is something different with the land in Scotland compared to England. There is something different with Wales and England. And it can't be maybe like put into words, but beyond what we can describe with words, they're like deeper senses of our intuition, of our inner guidance, our inner vision. And the more we purify ourselves, the more we do Naam, the more we detox our bodies, the more we will be able to be in tune and receive these subtle layers of information. And therefore, we will be able to recognize who we are, who we have come here to be, and embody ourselves. Somehow, that has been my experience.
Amazing. And
Like for me, for example, coming to England, I had so much understanding about who I am and how this life has come to play for me because of the connection of the British Empire and India. Like growing up in Austria, there are not many Indian people in Austria, especially in the mountains. But through that historical connection, very recent historical connection, and through learning about Sikhi, about the history of colonialism, about when the Mughals invaded India and how Sikhi evolved, I learned so much about who I am, who my parents were, my grandparents, what they went through, and that really has shaped me to be who I am right now as well. It ties back again, that has shaped my DNA. So by understanding that, it has allowed me to understand myself. And through that understanding and finding peace and forgiveness with the past and peace and forgiveness within myself, um, yeah, it has brought in hopefully a speck more of peace into the world.
amazing. Like the peace and forgiveness, I think that's what we need, because we were speaking with Stella as well in a previous podcast. Like, there's a lot of shame with some British people in colonialism, and there's a lot of repressed anger with immigrants here. But when we actually delve in and see that for what it is and confront it, and then say it's happened, and then how can we accept that? So as we wrap up, um, maybe just a fun question to end on is like, what's your views on perhaps why we're also in the news starting to see greater uh, interest on extraterrestrial findings and things like that, to leave the viewers on a bit of a curiosity?
As I shared, indigenous cultures, ancient civilizations, very much aware of our connections as a human race to the cosmos. Everything in this microcosm of planet Earth is a reflection of the macrocosm of this universe and this galaxy and beyond. Like if you look at all ancient scriptures, there is some connection to the stars, and who knows what's going to happen the next years as hopefully our consciousness expands. Um, we might get some visitors. I mean, people say there are sightings of unidentified flying objects. You see interviews here and there where US Air Force pilots share they have seen these objects. It's definitely exciting times with a lot of change afoot for all of us. And yeah, let's stay excited, let's stay curious. And I think what has helped me is to connect to my heart, do what I can to find peace within myself. And sometimes it's not comfortable, things that we need to go through to find the peace, because we need to feel the pain, we might need to feel the trauma, we might need to feel the hurt that we or maybe our ancestors experienced. But if we go through that, we can shed a lot of weight that has been loaded onto our shoulders, and we can live a more free and liberated life.
Amazing. I'm just beginning the journey, but thank you for sharing your journey. And yeah, I really appreciate sitting down with you and having this discussion in the time and the space that we're in now.
Oh, it's been my honor, my pleasure, Jyoti. Thank you for your presence, for your warm heart, your curiosity. I feel you say you're at the beginning of the journey, but I feel the sincerity of your heart, and it's been a real honor to sit with you and have this conversation.
Waheguru Ji Ka Khalsa,
ਵਾਹਿਗੁਰੂ ਜੀ ਕਾ ਖਾਲਸਾ
Waheguru Ji Ki
ਵਾਹਿਗੁਰੂ ਜੀ ਕੀ
Fateh.
ਫਤਿਹ